The overhead lights at Brookside Market buzzed quietly, their cold glare reflecting off polished linoleum tiles as the late afternoon lull settled over the store. Outside, autumn leaves swirled in a gentle wind, but inside, time seemed suspended in that peculiar stillness between school pickup and dinner rush. At checkout lane 4, Rachel Carter gripped the handle of a shopping cart with white-knuckled fingers, her lips forming a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her 2 children, Elijah, 6, and Lily, 4, were back at home with a neighbor, and she had exactly 1 hour to get through this. Each item in her cart had been selected with care. Generic brand cereal, discounted ground beef, canned vegetables, a loaf of bread with yellow manager's special sticker. Between juggling coupons on her phone and double-checking her mental tally, she calculated the total to be just under $70. It wasn't just food. It was a week's worth of lunches for Elijah's lunchbox. It was a full stomach for Lily, so she wouldn't wake up hungry again. It was one more attempt to make something feel normal. Rachel exhaled slowly as she stepped into line. Only one customer ahead, and then it would be her turn. She glanced toward the cashier, a young man with soft eyes and a warm smile, scanning items methodically but with care. His name tag read Marcus H., and she vaguely recognized him from previous visits. He always said, "Thank you," like he meant it. The woman ahead finished paying and wheeled her cart away. Rachel stepped forward, pasting on her practiced smile. "Hey," Marcus greeted, his voice easy and calm. "How's your day going?" "Oh, she said, attempting lightness. "Surviving." He chuckled softly and began scanning. One item after another passed over the laser. Rachel watched each beat with a growing tightness in her chest. $57, $64, $68. Her heart ticked faster. She reached into her purse and pulled out her debit card, fingers trembling just slightly. Marcus gave her a small nod. "Ready when you are." She inserted the card. The screen blinked once. Then again. Declined. Rachel's stomach dropped. She let out a nervous chuckle, avoiding eye contact. "Must be a glitch," she said too quickly, pulling the card out and reinserting it. Her voice cracked slightly. "Let's try again." Marcus waited, the machine processing once more. Declined. She blinked fast. Her throat tightened. She reached into her purse, searching for a second card she knew probably wouldn't work either, her hands fumbling, her composure slipping. I don't understand," she murmured. "There should have been enough in there. I was sure." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes flicked from the screen to Rachel, and then to the children's cereal, the milk, the peanut butter. He saw what she was trying so hard to hide. And instead of the awkward silence most people offered in these moments, or worse, the subtle judgment, he did something else. "Just a second," he said, his tone casual but firm. He stepped to the side, pulled out his own wallet, and slid a card into the register. Rachel froze. "Wait, no, please. You can't do that. I'll come back. I'll figure something out." Marcus looked at her and smiled, not out of pity, but with quiet assurance. "It's okay. Really. Everybody needs a break sometimes." The screen lit up green. Approved. The beep of the receipt printer was the only sound for a long second. Rachel's eyes filled. She looked around, as if expecting someone to stop this, to call it out, to shame her, but the aisle was still quiet. The next customer hadn't even stepped up yet. "I'll pay you back," she whispered, clutching the card handle again. "I swear, I didn't mean—" "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said gently. "Just pay it forward someday if you can." Rachel walked out of the store in a daze, the wheels of the cart thudding softly against the sidewalk. As she reached her car, she stopped, pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, and wept, not just because of the groceries, but because someone saw her, really saw her, and chose to act with kindness instead of indifference. That night, after her children were fed and asleep, Rachel opened her laptop. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She didn't name the store or the cashier. She didn't want it to be about attention, but she needed to let it out. Today, a stranger did something that reminded me people still care. I was at my lowest, trying to hide it, and he didn't shame me. He helped me. Quietly. Humbly. I wish I knew his name. I wish I could tell him what it meant. But maybe if I put this out there, it'll reach him or someone who needs to hear it. She hit post. She expected a few likes from friends. But by midnight, the post had been shared over 200 times. By morning, it would be thousands. And somewhere out there, someone unexpected was about to read it. By the time Marcus's shift ended that evening, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Unbeknownst to him, while he was sweeping under his register and restocking plastic bags, the internet was lighting up with a quiet explosion of gratitude. Rachel's post, heartfelt and stripped of drama, had begun to echo through feeds across the country. People didn't need a name. The truth of the moment resonated deeply. Someone had helped without asking for anything in return, without cameras or hashtags. Just a human gesture in the middle of an ordinary day. But Marcus didn't know any of that yet. He walked out of Brookside Market that night with the same calm stride he always had, earbuds in, hoodie pulled over his head as the early autumn chill deepened. He had no idea that his quiet act of kindness had become something much bigger than a single grocery bill. Meanwhile, Rachel sat on her couch, knees pulled up beneath her, laptop balanced precariously as her notifications refused to slow down. Her post had passed 10,000 shares. Comments poured in from strangers across the country. Single parents, people who'd once been in her shoes, people who'd never imagined such kindness still existed. Some offered to send her money. Others simply said thank you for reminding them of decency. But Rachel wasn't looking for charity. That was never the point. What caught her off guard wasn't the attention. It was the private message she received the next morning, tucked between dozens of others. It came from a woman named Danielle, who introduced herself as the office manager for a small graphic design firm a few blocks from Brookside Market. She had seen Rachel's post, read between the lines, and wrote, "We've been looking for someone to help with admin and client coordination. I don't know your background, but your writing caught our eye, and your resilience. Would you be open to a chat?" Rachel read the message twice. Then again, her hands trembled, but not from fear this time. Something inside her stirred. Hope, fragile but persistent. She hadn't worked in over a year. After her divorce and the slow unraveling of her finances, job interviews had turned into a series of rejections and apologies. She'd stopped trying somewhere along the way, convinced the world had quietly decided she was no longer qualified for anything beyond survival. But now, someone had seen her, not just her story, but her. She replied to Danielle with a cautious yes, not daring to imagine where it might lead. At Brookside, the ripple of Rachel's post finally reached the front office. The general manager, Mr. Donovan, a man known for his strictness and devotion to order, was handed a printed copy of the post by the assistant manager. At first, he skimmed it without much thought, but halfway through, he stopped, reread a paragraph, and leaned back in his chair. "Who was on register for last night?" he asked. The assistant checked the schedule. "Marcus Hill." Donovan frowned, then stood. "Bring him in when he gets here." When Marcus arrived later that afternoon, still unaware of anything unusual, he was surprised to be summoned to the manager's office. The usual thoughts raced through his mind. Did someone complain? Did he forget to clock out properly? Was he in trouble? He stepped inside, and Donovan gestured for him to sit. Marcus sat, his hands resting on his knees, trying to keep his expression neutral. "I want to talk about something that happened yesterday," Donovan said, placing the printed page on the desk between them. Marcus recognized the post immediately. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't say anything. "That was you," Donovan said, though it wasn't a question. Marcus gave a small nod. "She didn't have enough. I didn't think it was a big deal." "You didn't tell anyone," Donovan added. "It wasn't about telling anyone," Marcus said quietly. "She looked like she just needed someone to not make her feel worse." Donovan watched him for a moment, then leaned forward. "You broke protocol. Technically, cashiers aren't supposed to use personal cards at the register." Marcus tensed, unsure where this was going. But Donovan continued, "In this case, I'm glad you did." He slid the paper toward Marcus. "This post has been viewed over 100,000 times since last night. People are tagging the store, trying to find out who you are. They're calling this a story of the year kind of thing, and I think we should tell them. Marcus's eyes widened. Wait, you want to go public with this? Donovan smiled. People need to see the good in the world right now, and you did something good. Later that evening, Brookside Market's official Facebook page posted a photo of Marcus, just him in his green apron, standing by Register 4, with a caption that simply read, "Sometimes kindness is quiet. We're proud to say this is one of our own. Thank you, Marcus." The post exploded almost instantly. Local news stations picked it up. Customers came into the store asking for him by name. One older woman waited in his line just to say, "You reminded me of my son. He used to be like you." Marcus took it all in stride, smiling politely, helping bag groceries, never letting it inflate his sense of self. To him, nothing had changed, but Rachel knew better. From her end of the city, watching it all unfold, she understood what was happening. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a shift, a domino falling in slow motion. Because even as Marcus found himself at the center of sudden attention, Rachel found herself preparing for something far more personal, an interview. Danielle had followed through. The small graphic design firm, with its modest office and close-knit team, had welcomed Rachel in for a conversation. They didn't dwell on her gaps in employment or financial struggles. They asked about her strengths, her organization, her ability to communicate with clarity and heart. They offered her a chance. She accepted, and when she got back home that night, still wearing the same thrift store blazer she had dug out from the back of her closet, she opened her laptop and typed a new post. To the young man at Register 4, "Thank you. You didn't just pay for groceries. You gave me back a sense of dignity. And now, thanks to you, I'm walking into a new job next week. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but if you do, know that your kindness was not a small thing. It was everything." As the likes poured in again, and strangers once more sent words of encouragement, Rachel realized she was no longer standing at the edge of her life, waiting for something to save her. She was already moving forward. And somewhere Marcus Hill, quiet, kind, and unaware just how deep his gesture had reached, was helping someone else at the register, not knowing what was still to come. Vos dis. By the end of the week, the atmosphere inside Brookside Market had subtly shifted. A place once defined by quiet aisles and routine transactions now carried an undercurrent of energy, fueled by the stream of customers coming in not just for groceries, but for something far less tangible, connection. They weren't just shopping anymore. They were looking for Marcus Hill. Older couples, teenagers with phones in hand, even local reporters with microphones discreetly tucked into their bags. All of them stood in line at Register 4, not for discounts or deals, but for a moment to shake Marcus's hand, to offer a hug, or to simply say thank you for reminding them what decency looked like in a world often too busy to care. Marcus, ever modest, kept his demeanor steady. He smiled, nodded, offered the same "have a good one" he always had, but now there was a growing self-awareness in his eyes. He wasn't seeking attention, but it had found him nonetheless, and there was no retreating from it. His story had stopped being just his. It had become something people clung to, a symbol of hope wrapped in something as mundane as a bag of groceries. The store's management quickly adapted. Mr. Donovan, impressed by the surge of positive publicity, leaned into the narrative. They launched a small in-store campaign called Moments That Matter, placing a photo of Marcus near the entrance with a caption that read, "One small act, one lasting impact." Other employees were encouraged to share their own moments of kindness, which were printed on cards and displayed on a board near the bakery. Brookside had never felt so alive. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel Carter adjusted to the unfamiliar rhythm of her new job. The office was bright and modest, with a faint scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee. She spent her first week at the design firm learning how to manage the client database, schedule meetings, and answer emails with professional polish. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every morning, she dressed with purpose, kissed her children goodbye, and walked into a place that needed her, not just tolerated her. Danielle, the woman who'd first messaged her, turned out to be more than a supervisor. She was a mentor of sorts, someone who recognized the grit behind Rachel's soft-spoken voice. During lunch breaks, They'd sit together near the window and talk, not just about work, but about motherhood, resilience, and the strange ways life sometimes redirected you. But just as the ground beneath her started to feel steady again, Rachel received a letter that sent a cold weight to the bottom of her stomach. It arrived on a Thursday evening, folded neatly in a plain white envelope that carried the seal of a federal loan agency. She opened it with a sinking feeling that had become too familiar over the past few years. Inside was a formal notice. Her student loan, which had been deferred during her years of financial instability, was now in active collections. The balance, staggering and unrelenting, had not vanished with her new job. And unless she took action within 30 days, her wages could be garnished and assets frozen. The letter sat in her lap like a verdict, a quiet warning that the progress she had clawed toward was still fragile, still vulnerable to the past. That night, after putting Elijah and Lily to bed, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the letter in one hand, a pen in the other, trying to calculate whether she could make it all work. Rent, groceries, childcare, gas, and now this. Her fingers pressed into her temples, and for a brief, unkind moment, the urge to give up clawed at her chest. But then, as the silence of the apartment pressed in around her, she remembered Marcus. She remembered his face, not as a viral figure everyone now praised, but as a young man who had looked at her, not through her, and chosen compassion without hesitation. He didn't know her story. He hadn't needed to. He simply saw someone struggling and responded with grace. That memory, raw and bright, cut through her fear, and for the first time since receiving the letter, she breathed in deeply and exhaled without tears. The next morning, Rachel made two decisions. First, she would not let this setback undo what she had started. Second, she would be transparent about it. She didn't want to hide anymore. She wanted her story to be more than a series of emergencies. She wanted it to be a blueprint for others trying to rebuild. She found a local nonprofit that offered free financial counseling for low-income residents. At her appointment, she sat across from a soft-spoken woman named Teresa, who didn't flinch when she saw the numbers. Together, they laid out a plan, call the loan servicer, apply for income-driven repayment, submit documentation, and file for temporary forbearance. It wasn't a magic solution, but it was a path forward. Rachel documented every step. In the evenings, once the kids were asleep, she began writing again, not just short posts, but full reflections. She titled her series Letters to the Version of Me Who Almost Gave Up and shared them on social media. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't dramatize. She simply told the truth. To her surprise, people responded. Each post garnered hundreds of comments. Others began sharing their own financial stories, debts, job loss, recovery. A community formed around her vulnerability. A week later, one of her posts was picked up by a local blog that highlighted voices of resilience. From there, it made its way to a community organization that was planning a public event focused on economic recovery and personal stories of transformation. Rachel received an invitation to speak. She read the email 3 times before daring to believe it. They wanted her. Rachel Carter, single mother, former waitress, woman who once cried in her car outside a grocery store, to speak in front of others as an example of persistence and hope. She didn't say yes immediately. She wasn't sure she had the confidence. But Danielle encouraged her, even offering to help her draft her talk. "You're not just surviving anymore," she told her. "You're teaching others how to keep going." Rachel accepted. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday, held in the community center downtown. Flyers circulated online. Her name was listed simply as Rachel Carter, writer and advocate for resilience. She would tell her story. All of it. The moments that nearly broke her. The cashier who changed everything. The job. The debt. The courage to speak. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that someone else would be at that event too. Someone whose life had also been changed by a single moment. And when their paths cross again, it wouldn't be under fluorescent lights or the soft beep of a scanner. It would be in front of a crowd, under a banner that read, "The Power of One Small Act." And Marcus Hill would be standing just a few rows away, holding something he never thought he'd have, a future shaped not by what he lacked, but by what he had chosen to give. The community center buzzed with quiet anticipation as folding chairs filled row by row. String lights hung loosely from the rafters, casting a soft golden glow across the room. A modest wooden podium stood at the front of the space, flanked by two banners. One read, "Rebuilding Together," and the other, more striking in its simplicity, read, "Stories That Heal." The audience was a mix of city officials, nonprofit organizers, local residents, and a few people who had seen Rachel's posts online and come simply to listen. It was not a grand affair, but it felt intimate, real, the kind of gathering where the stories mattered more than the speakers themselves. Backstage, Rachel stood by a mirror in a small green room with a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, her reflection staring back with equal parts determination and fear. She wore the same navy blue blazer from her job interview, paired with a long tan skirt and a pair of flats she had borrowed from Danielle. Her hair had been tied back simply, and her makeup was minimal, just enough to keep the camera lights from washing her out. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. Focus, perhaps, or the weight of everything she had chosen not to run from. A volunteer peeked in and gave her the signal. 2 minutes. She nodded, swallowed hard, and placed the cup on the table. As she stepped toward the small hallway leading to stage, she clutched a folded note in her blazer pocket. The speech she'd rewritten 3 times the night before. Not polished, not theatrical, just honest. Out in the audience, Marcus sat quietly near the middle row, flanked by 2 friends from the market. He had come on invitation from one of the event organizers, who had contacted the store after seeing Brookside's Facebook post. At first, he had hesitated to accept. He wasn't used to attention. But when he heard that Rachel would be speaking, Rachel, the woman from the checkout line, something compelled him to go, not out of pride, but out of curiosity. He hadn't seen her since that day, and part of him wondered if she even remembered him at all. Rachel stepped onto the stage to a warm, respectful round of applause. She reached the podium, placed her notes down, and looked up, not at the lights, not at the ceiling, but directly into the crowd. Her voice was calm when she began, though it carried the weight of someone who had spent too many nights being brave alone. She spoke not just of hardship, but of exhaustion. The exhaustion of balancing motherhood with job hunting, of navigating systems that seemed designed to humiliate rather than help. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply told the truth about the eviction notice that had come 6 months prior, the night she'd gone without eating to feed her kids, and the morning she pretended everything was fine because her children needed to believe it was. Then she spoke of a moment at a grocery store when her car was declined, when her massive composure cracked, and when a stranger did something that felt impossibly rare. He saw her, not with pity, not with annoyance, but with compassion. And that changed everything. She did not name Marcus. She didn't need to. The room understood. And as she continued, she shared the letter she had received weeks later, the one about her student loans, and how it had nearly pulled her back under. But this time, she had fought, not with rage or despair, but with action. She had asked for help, learned how to renegotiate, and started documenting her journey not because she had figured it all out, but because she wanted to show others that they didn't have to figure out alone. As she neared the end of her speech, Rachel paused. The room held still. I used to think value came from what you could give, how much money you had, how productive you were, how easy you fit into the world's expectations. But I was wrong. Value isn't something you earn. It's something you have simply by being human. And sometimes it takes a stranger reminding you of that to believe it again. The applause was quiet at first, almost reverent, then grew as people stood. Rachel smiled, humbled and overwhelmed, before stepping down from the stage and walking slowly toward the back of the room. She was halfway down the aisle when she saw him. Marcus stood there, hands in his pockets, his face open but unsure. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Rachel crossed the remaining space between them and stopped. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said softly. "I didn't know if I should come," Marcus replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't want to make it about me." Rachel gave a half laugh, half sigh. "You didn't, but you were part of it, a big part." For a moment, the noise around them faded. They weren't speaker and audience member anymore, Just two people standing in the aftermath of something quiet but powerful. "I never got to say thank you," Rachel added. "You did," Marcus said, his voice low. "Every time you kept going." They sat together later, off to the side as the next speaker took the stage. They talked about small things at first, his shift schedule, her kids, the strange way the internet turns people into symbols. But then the conversation deepened. Marcus shared that after everything had unfolded, he had begun to think about his own future differently. "I dropped out of school after one semester," he admitted. "Didn't think I had what it took. But seeing how all of this happened, it made me think. Maybe I meant to do more than just ring up groceries." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Curious. More?" "I applied to go back to school. For social work," Marcus said almost shyly. "I want to be the kind of person who doesn't just help by accident. I want to do it on purpose." Rachel's eyes welled with tears she hadn't expected, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. Here they were, two people whose lives had collided in a moment of crisis, now moving forward not just because of kindness, but because of choice. The applause for the next speaker brought them back to the present, but neither of them moved right away. In the quiet between the noise, something settled, an understanding that this wasn't the end of their story, nor was it the beginning. It was a point of connection that would ripple outward, touching others they hadn't even met yet. Later, as they said goodbye near the parking lot, Rachel turned to Marcus one last time. "You didn't just help me that day," she said. "You helped remind me who I was. That matters more than you'll ever know." Marcus nodded. "You reminded me, too." As she drove away, the headlights catching the edges of fallen leaves, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope, would have been there in flickers, but trust. Trust in herself, in others, in the unseen threads that connected people across days and decisions. And Marcus, standing beneath the soft glow of the center's marquee, watched her go with the quiet resolve of someone who had finally decided to stop waiting for a purpose and start living it. Vos dis. The Monday following the event brought an unusual stillness to Rachel's world, as if life itself had paused momentarily to take in a shift she was just beginning to understand. Everything on the surface remained the same: morning routines with the kids, lunch packed in brown bags, the familiar walk from school to the bus stop, then the quiet hum of the office. But beneath it all was a change that didn't announce itself loudly, only made itself known in the subtle ways her body carried less tension and her voice held less hesitation. She had told her story in public. She had looked her fears in the eye and spoken them aloud. And instead of rejection, she had received applause, not because her story was extraordinary, but because it was honest, and people had seen themselves in it. That sense of quiet recognition continued throughout the week. At the office, Danielle printed out a photo someone had taken of Rachel at the podium and pinned it to the corkboard in the break room, with a handwritten note beside it that read, "Courage doesn't always roar." Coworkers offered warm smiles and genuine congratulations. Even a client, during a project call, briefly thanked Rachel for sharing what she did, saying it gave her sister the courage to reach out for help. But it wasn't just professional validation that filled the air. It was something deeper. In the evenings, Rachel sat with her children at the dinner table and answered their curious questions about the event. Lily, wide-eyed, asked if everyone clapped for her like on TV. Elijah, older and more perceptive, simply asked, "Were you scared, Mom?" To which Rachel replied, "Yes, but that's how I knew it mattered." Still, even as the praise settled in, Rachel felt the gentle weight of unfinished business. Not with Marcus. He had become more of a quiet presence in her life since the event, exchanging texts occasionally, sharing little updates about his school application or long shifts at Brookside. But with herself, she realized that the chapter of her life marked by survival was closing. What came next wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about stepping fully into the future with intention. And that future, surprisingly, began to take shape just 2 weeks after the event, when she received an invitation she hadn't expected. The local school district had seen her posts, specifically the series about navigating debt and employment as a single parent, and wanted to know if she would be willing to speak to a group of high school seniors about real-world readiness. It wasn't just a talk about budgeting or career advice. They wanted her to share her story, her failures, her fight to keep going, and what resilience really looked like when life didn't go according to plan. The idea intimidated her at first. Adults were one thing, mature enough to empathize. But teenagers? She wasn't sure they would care. Or worse, that they might pity her. But the counselor on the phone assured her, they need to hear something real. And you're one of the most real people we've come across. So, on a Friday morning, Rachel stood in the library of the local high school, surrounded by rows of students slouched in chairs, earbuds dangling, arms crossed skeptically. She began awkwardly, fumbling her opening lines, until she abandoned the script entirely and just started talking like she would to her own son, about losing her job, about the car decline, about Marcus, about sitting in her car with a week's worth of groceries and no idea how she was going to make it through the month. And then about the moment she realized no one was going to save her. But that didn't mean she was beyond saving. At first, the room was quiet in the way teenagers are when they're skeptical of being moved. But halfway through, she noticed the posture of the room shift. One student put their phone down. Another leaned forward. A girl in the back wiped a tear when Rachel described the shame she'd once felt just walking into a job interview, certain she'd already failed before she began. By the time she finished, no one clapped. Not immediately. They just sat in it. Then one voice, soft, uncertain, said, "Thank you." It was enough. Rachel stepped down, her hands trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from something closer to humility. She wasn't becoming a speaker. She wasn't chasing viral fame. She was simply being seen for the first time in a long time, and using that to give something back. After the talk, a few students lingered. One boy asked how to help his mom, who was working 2 jobs. Another girl asked how Rachel handled feeling like she wasn't good enough. Rachel answered each question with the only authority she had, her lived experience. And as she walked out of school, the sun breaking to the morning clouds, she felt grounded in a way that no paycheck or applause had ever managed to do. That same afternoon, she received a message from Marcus. Short, almost hesitant. Got the acceptance email. I'm going back to school. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time, a smile forming slowly. She replied simply, "You have no idea how proud I am of you." Marcus, for his part, wasn't entirely sure what would come of returning to school. He had enrolled in a community college program for social work, determined to explore the path that had called to him quietly for years. He began attending evening classes, studying while still working part-time shifts at the market. It wasn't easy. He struggled with essays and found group projects frustrating. But he also found a kind of peace in finally aligning his life with something he believed in. Not the heroic, internet-famous version of himself, but the quiet young man who had once watched a woman nearly fall apart at the register and had chosen, instinctively, to hold the moment together. The two of them stayed in touch, not constantly, but consistently. A coffee here, a text update there. Their bond wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was rooted in something quieter and deeper, mutual respect, and the unshakable knowledge that their lives had forever changed because one saw the other as worthy before either of them truly believed it themselves. Months passed and life moved forward. Elijah started 2nd grade. Lily learned to ride a bike. Rachel continued writing, sharing updates about her journey, now with more stability than struggle. She was promoted at work, then invited to contribute to a local podcast about community resilience. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was helping others find the courage to tell theirs. And Marcus, after his first semester, submitted an essay for a class called The Ethics of Helping. In it, he wrote about that day at the market, about what it meant to offer help without certainty, and about how that moment had changed 2 lives. His professor read it aloud in class and asked who the woman in the story was. Marcus didn't answer. He just said, "She reminded me what it means to believe in someone." The story, it turned out, wasn't about a transaction. It wasn't even about the groceries. It was about something far more powerful, the recognition of worth in a moment when the world so often looks away. Rachel had walked into that store with a heart full of fear and left with more than food. Marcus had stood behind a register doing what he thought was ordinary, only to discover the extraordinary ripple it would cause. Neither of them had planned it. Neither of them had expected it. But that's how the most important truths often arrive. Quietly, humbly, and with the power to reveal the true value of a person when the world isn't watching.